This video is sponsored by Big Bad Toy Store. Silent Hill has seen quite a few changes since its first installment. From the visuals to the mechanics and narrative elements, there have been so many shifts even within just the first 4 games, which then of course multiply tenfold when you bring the spin-off titles into the equation. I've been slowly making my way through all of these experiences, as well as the Western developed section of the Silent Hill catalogue, and I've spoken about my time with almost every one of them so far on my channel. I was genuinely impressed when I played Shattered Memories last year, and set my eyes on another mechanically compelling entry, Silent Hill Downpour. Anyone who has seen my previous videos on the franchise will know that I'm not someone who is particularly precious about what a Silent Hill game has to be. So when I discovered that an open world title existed, I was very excited to give it a try, especially since my relatively few ventures into open world horror before it had proved to be fruitful. Not only did I have a great time with Downpour, but I also found that there's a lot more to discuss about its various aspects than I originally thought. By the way, quick spoiler and content warning for the game, as there are a few subjects that may be disturbing for some. Released in 2012 and developed by Czech studio Vatra Games, Silent Hill Downpour would be the second and final game we'd see from Vatra, the first being Russian Attack Expatriate, which came out a year prior. Although Downpour is from Western developers, artist Masahiro Ito, original member of the disbanded Team Silent, did contribute in the form of some haunting cover art for the Japanese version. The development history and story behind this title is an interesting one, and I'd like to thank senior associate producer Tomm for kindly providing some insight on the making of the game, which will feature throughout the video. For some background, this iteration of Silent Hill follows the story of Murphy Pendleton, an inmate at Ryle State Prison on the day of their transfer to Wayside Maximum Security, a journey that is interrupted by a sudden accident on the road. The crash provides Murphy with an opportunity to flee, though his escape eventually leads him into the horrors of Silent Hill. This franchise is one I've definitely indulged in collecting official merch for over the years, mostly in the realm of figures. For that reason, I'm very happy that Big Bad Toy Store is sponsoring today's video. Founded back in 1999, the store is one of the largest, oldest, and most trusted online retailers of toys and collectibles. They have a range of products spanning categories like video games, movies, and anime, including countless fan favourite IPs for each. Of course, I'd like to spotlight the Silent Hill selection, a few items of which I already own. I really love the Numbskull Heather Mason statue and Figma Nurse, but if you're looking for something in the lower price range, there are a couple figures and plushies on pre-order too. I saw a few Robbie the Rabbit options which caught my eye, but I was noticeably missing a pyramid head on my shelf, which there's no shortage of choice for. I was very kindly sent the Mezco Toys Static 6 statue, and I have to say the detail is amazing. The special base really elevates the presentation while combining a colour palette that I find very satisfying to look at. It's a high quality premium option for sure, and I can definitely see why. For other high-end products, you can also take a look at the ones by Gecko and First 4 Figures, with my personal favourite option being the Mira coin bank that's on pre-order right now. I was even sent this incredible Kiryu figure which I am obsessed with. I know some of you must love the Like a Dragon series too, and I had to share this because I had no idea this and the Majima and Ichiban variations existed before browsing the site. There's a $4 flat rate shipping fee on all orders, so if you want to treat yourself to some really cool merch for your favourite IPs, you can click on the link in the description. A huge thank you to Big Bad Toy Store for sponsoring today's video. While Downpour's residential streets follow the expected style and are shrouded in that familiar Silent Hill fog, there are places and especially interiors which are stylistically quite different. Many of the buildings you enter are somewhat gothic in appearance, perhaps influenced by the kind of architecture that would be present in the Czech Republic where the developers were based. It ends up giving a classic New York vibe in some rooms, whereas other spaces felt distinctly European, and I was stopped in my tracks by how genuinely gorgeous some of the scenes looked. The Centennial Building, apartments, and graveyard, for example, are among some of my most memorable locations. It obviously makes for a different atmosphere to what I've experienced in previous titles, but its environmental uniqueness ended up being one of my favourite aspects of Downpour. I very much welcome changes like this in the series, and allowing games to create their own identity can really pay off.
I think a lot of this is the Czech influence. Western Europe and North America have enough common threads. I think it's probably more similar than we realize, if that is our whole sphere of reference. And obviously game players are familiar with Japan through games, Yakuza and Persona of course, among others, but Eastern Europe is far less represented. I think that Vatra, making what they know, had a positive effect on the game's visuals and ambience. It is one of the most unique and interesting of the Western Silent Hill games. I think it's generally accepted that as a whole, Western gamers prefer the original Silent Hill games made in Japan. And it turns out, there are a lot of Japanese fans who love the Western games most, going so far as to import Homecoming, which was an interesting thing to discover. It tells me that an important part of Silent Hill's creepiness is that sense of something is just off, that you can't put your finger on. And maybe it's a result of unconscious cultural influences creeping into the design of the town itself than being perceived through a cultural lens.
One of the specific Czech influences on the game is the real-life Punkva Caverns, a cave system situated north of the city where Vatra were based.
At the bottom of the caves is a river, and your group of maybe 20 tourists board a small boat and a guide navigates you through these dimly lit caverns. The guide was discussing that this journey changes based on rainfall, as the water level in the caves may be too high to be safe. And as he said this, we noticed that the ceiling was coming awfully low. In fact, we scraped our shoulders a bit on the rock. Afterward, we both noted that in America, they would never have sailed at that water level. There would be signs and barriers preventing you from touching the rock, and the boat might even be on a track or a guide of some kind to ensure maximum safety. We understood a lot more about Downpour's Silent Hill after that excursion.
While researching the caverns, I also found that there's a sinkhole there called the Matsorha Abyss. Most notably though, there's a folk story whereby a stepmother pushed her stepson into the abyss, so her own son would get the family's inheritance instead. One version of this tale says that after realizing what she had done, she also throws herself off the same cliff, unable to live with her crime. When I read this, it instantly brought to mind the character J.P. Sater, who once operated the train for the children who visited the Devil's Pit, a cave system and tourist attraction we visit near the start of Downpour. One day he derailed the train while drunk, killing the 8 passengers on board. Instead of placing blame on himself, however, he adamantly focuses on the newspapers instead, accusing them of lying.
You know, none of those things they said about me are true. The papers and stuff, people around town, my lawyers, they said it was just circumstantial evidence and whatnot. That's what I kept telling them.
Yeah, I read all about it.
Those newspaper men are goddamn fucking liars.
He eventually and vaguely admits guilt in the presence of Murphy, before jumping off a viewing platform into the abyss below.
And we're the ones who decide if we can live with what we've done. Be seeing you around, Murphy.
No!
In regards to features from previous entries that did return in Downpour, I was particularly pleased to see parts from Shattered Memories brought back in this game. There are several instances where the environment will dissolve into something else entirely, morphing spaces in real time like how the areas Harry Mason was in would freeze over into the icy otherworld he was faced with. Downpour does this with its otherworld transitions too, but also occasionally as a way to present flashbacks, or dynamic transformations such as the backdrop of a theatre stage changing into a real forest and cabin embedded into the hall. The game follows the tradition of naming streets after notable horror authors, a habit that began in the very first Silent Hill. It includes names like King Avenue and Straub Street, presumably referring to Stephen King and Peter Straub respectively. These new streets and sections of the town were added onto its map in a way that would make sense with the rest of Silent Hill that has been explored in previous installments.
I spent a lot of time figuring out where the other districts of Silent Hill would be, as well as Ashfield, and made sure that they were properly charted on large road signs. I made a map and measured distance and everything.
Murphy's otherworld manifests as a surreal, rust-covered industrial version of his own world. Or in other cases, especially in the last stretch of the game, it's an appropriately distorted prison environment. The otherworld often features blades and deadly traps like a twisted obstacle course. There's a prominent use of execution and torture motifs throughout, including guillotine doorways and corridors of spikes that bring to mind the innards of an Iron Maiden. The theme of punishment does not go amiss in this realm. Anyway, the laws of reality don't belong in this place, and the only sense of order comes from the organised rows of prison cells in this hell made of concrete and cold steel. Akin to the ending segment taking place in prison, the game opens with Murphy in a real-life penitentiary. Here, a shady officer by the name of George Sewell leads our protagonist to the showers to present him with the perfect opportunity to kill another inmate called Patrick Napier, as well as providing the player a pretty brutal combat tutorial. Later on in the game, it would be revealed that Napier was responsible for the kidnap and murder of Murphy's son Charlie, and his desperation leads Murphy to purposefully get incarcerated at the same institution in the hopes of enacting revenge. This proves a little more difficult than he thought since Napier is in solitary confinement, so Murphy makes a deal with the corrupt Officer Sewell in order to get time alone with his son's killer.
You don't recognize me, do you?
What? No, Guard! Anybody?
We used to be neighbors.
Guards, open the goddamn door! Help somebody!
Several years pass by after this incident, and we see Murphy is scheduled to be transferred to another facility. Officer Anne-Marie Cunningham keeps particularly close watch over Murphy as he is escorted outside to board a bus alongside a few other inmates.
Pendleton. Get on the bus.
As the group make their way along their route, however, the driver sees a vision of a broken road ahead, violently swerving the bus and sending it crashing down into the forest below. Our protagonist wakes up disoriented and alone beside the wreckage, which welcomes us to the first main playable area called the Devil's Pit Stop, along with an introduction to the core gameplay mechanics in Downpour. One of the recurring gameplay features on offer are the chase sequences, the first of which happens in the kitchen of the diner, where we initially see the otherworld bleed into view. Murphy doesn't travel very far when an entity aptly called the Void suddenly appears, and relentlessly chases our protagonist through numerous winding corridors. Getting caught by the Void won't kill the player immediately in most cases, but sustaining enough damage from it will. The game goes into a slow motion mode while in the entity's grasp, along with Murphy voicing his clear discomfort. Luckily though, if you keep moving, you'll quite easily escape, so it's fairly forgiving when it comes to any wrong turns. And worst case, if you are close to death, you can quickly heal using the D-pad, which doesn't prompt any animation or slowdown. Another thing you can do in these segments is push over items to increase the distance between Murphy and the pursuer, although admittedly I rarely ever did since I seem to do fine without it. After the linear chapters we've experienced in the game up until this point, we're finally thrown into the open world of Silent Hill. I really love open world horror, with Dead Rising, Deadly Premonition, and Evil Within 2 coming to mind. There's a level of coziness with the freedom of doing what you want and exploring, even if there are horrors present. And I get a sense of progression that isn't defined by linear milestones, but rather from the feeling like I personally discovered more about the world I'm in at my own pace. There are so many optional moments in Downpour that the player can stumble across should they put the effort into exploring. and that consists of smaller treasures like cutscenes or conversations from Murphy's past to give us more insight into his history. The side quests, on the other hand, let us go even further in exploring this part of Silent Hill, providing numerous aspects for the player to enjoy, whether that's more puzzles, story details, or even just really cool visuals and mechanics. For instance, one of the quests that stood out to me the most took place at the movie theatre, whereby you can play different film reels that you can quite literally walk into via the big screen. It has these really stunning scenes presented with a vintage film filter that you explore like a fixed camera survival horror game. The goal is to find the numbers for the code to access a room in the cinema where you can then splice the movies together, and enter the screen one last time to grab a wooden handle to use on a jack-in-the-box, which will grant you a key to open a chest and reward you with a fancy golden gun. There's also another quest where you can manipulate time using a gramophone to play a murder scene in reverse. It then shows a Silent Hill 4-like ghost jutting out from a portrait on the wall, which you set on fire with your lighter to put the spirits at rest. It was genuinely quite eerie playing through some of these shorter, contained stories in the town. It felt like there was so much depth and history on the fringes, as opposed to the protagonist's story simply taking over every corner of the experience. In addition to this, things like playing spot the difference between two rooms using a mirror is a very cool idea, and thanks to having these open world aspects in the game, these puzzles can exist without the pressure of having to perfectly fit the main story's areas and narrative.
I had several aspects of the original Silent Hill games that I kept championing for the new ones, and one aspect was how much of Silent Hill 1 was exploring the town itself. It was relatively huge. Silent Hill 2 had a smaller, more focused set of town areas, and then Silent Hill 3 reused those. Origins brought it back to a degree, but there wasn't very much to do beyond the main quest. Another thing I loved was how the notes in the original games would often mention characters or side stories that were not part of the main quest, but definitely contributed to the atmosphere and creepiness. Lastly, open world games like GTA 3 were cropping up all over. So these three factors all coalesced to become Downpour's big explorable town filled with optional side quests that told little mini stories. But to be clear, we were not asked, can you put in something modern like open world? It's more like what we wanted to accomplish with the town, and side quests made sense in an open world context. And then that created an exciting bullet point for marketing organically.
All in all, it always feels like there's more to uncover in Downpour even along the main story path. Like how there's a swing on the monastery grounds that you run past as you make your way through the level. But if you turn around, the swing transforms into a man hanging from the rope. It makes you doubt your sanity for a second, which ends up being incredibly memorable, and it's those natural moments that give this title its charm. I think the way that Downpour is structured also lends itself well to the fact that Silent Hill is a tourist town, allowing the player to also indulge in sightseeing of their own. The Devil's Pit level gives this feeling most of all, with information posts detailing the area's history and even a perilous train ride to really give us that tourist perspective. As for the souvenirs, there are quite a few documents and collectibles that Murphy can pick up and put into his journal. The scrapbook holds handwritten notes of quest details and progress, as well as clippings of maps, newspapers, and letters, creating a kind of diegetic menu system that helps keep playable scenes free of user interface elements. The same goes for Murphy's health, which is indicated through his body language and the bloodstains on his clothing. In addition to the quick heal button, it means the player can see and react to declining health very quickly, not having to interrupt combat or chase sequences by opening up the inventory. Speaking of which, Downpour goes for a Silent Hill 4 inspired display, letting you scroll through and select items through a bar at the top of the screen, which doesn't pause the game. Of course, there is also a pause menu for options that includes viewable stats, so you can easily see your exact health points or how many enemies you've killed, for example. Overall, there's a large selection of equipable weapons on offer. This includes things like axes and crowbars, but also a lot of everyday objects such as chairs and bricks. It makes more sense considering weapon durability exists, though I didn't personally encounter this often since I had a habit of switching strong weapons quite frequently whenever I found a new one. There are even some special weapons you can obtain from side quests which tend to be more resilient and/or powerful. Though firearms are available, there aren't many to choose from, and there will be several moments in the game where you lose the weapons you have equipped. You can also have a maximum of 2 on hand at any given time, and although carrying 2 guns might seem like the best choice, there will be times where specific melee objects are needed for their secondary use. The hook can be good for poking enemies at a distance, but you can also use it for pulling down ladders and accessing new areas. Likewise, the axes are needed for breaking down wooden boards that block your path. It's not just the combat tools that can have alternate uses though, as the UV flashlight can both light up your environment and show certain tracks and codes needed for puzzles. There are a few different places you can grab some money too, which can optionally be used to activate the jukebox in the diner. Or even on the observation deck in Devil's Pit to witness some missable sights through the binoculars. Other gameplay features include balancing and sliding segments, both of which I had to fail at least once to see what would happen. One of the main aspects of gameplay which also affects the ending a player gets is something that's borrowed from Shattered Memories. There's of course the chase sections and button to look behind you which also make an appearance, but it's the psychological profiling of that game which takes its form as a morality system in Downpour. Your morality points depend on what option you select during the few moments throughout a playthrough where the player is confronted with a choice on screen. The answers are quite obvious in terms of which one is good and which one is bad, and the effects of this decision aren't directly shown until much later. The immediate outcomes are the same for these instances, like how Anne falls from the cliff regardless of if Murphy tries to help or not.
Help me!
Sorry.
And it's only after the last player choice where we're given our specific endings as a result of both that particular decision and the morality points we've accrued thus far. While Shattered Memories was a lot more detailed in how what route a player takes or what they look at also contributes to the profiling system, Downpour simplifies this in the approach to combat. While fighting, you can take down enemies temporarily and leave them squirming around on the floor, but they're still able to recover after a while and come after you again. However, you also have the option to kill them if you continue to deal damage, which gets rid of them once and for all, but also has a negative effect on your morality points. Whether you choose to spare or kill the common adversaries doesn't seem to be hugely important though, as I quite liberally killed off most of the enemies I came across and still got the positive morality endings. I saw some guides say that how you deal with enemies is only considered if the main dialogue choices you made were an equal mix of good and bad as a tiebreaker, and from my experience I think that does seem to be the case. On the subject of combat, while I don't care all that much for it in Silent Hill titles, I did end up having a lot of fun experimenting with the different weapons and fighting moves available, especially throwing random objects at the creatures lurching towards me. There is actually a button to block incoming attacks, which I rarely attempted because I wasn't getting the timing down properly, and I always had a huge stock of first aid kits anyway. Plus, watching Murphy get absolutely battered and thrown around was pretty entertaining. In terms of how the open world deals with creature placements, they will spawn in randomly as you explore the town. When it rains, however, it becomes more dangerous with more enemies appearing at once. But fleeing these encounters is easy enough, so it's not something you have to seriously worry about. The most common enemy type you'll deal with is probably the Screamer. They pull off some pretty quick strikes in close combat, and can also jump on for a deadly piggyback ride if they get behind you. Yet it's their long-range attack that's the most troublesome, which involves them screaming and putting Murphy into a stunned state that you have to shake the analog stick to get out of. It can be a bit frustrating dealing with screamers when trying to explore sometimes, but that's all the more reason to get satisfaction out of throwing a brick at their head. Joining the screamers on the streets of Silent Hill, the prisoner types also roam the area as well as the final prison level. The brawler and stabber variations are basically the same, but the latter unsurprisingly wields a knife. And the Juggernaut is just a big boy who hits heavy and charges at you. The Weeping Bats also pull off some powerful attacks, as they can hang from the ceilings and drop down on you, which sends you flying. It can sometimes be difficult to avoid this move in tight spaces, so either get the hell out of there or take it out quickly. Although not as common, the dolls can be a tricky enemy to try and kill. They spawn semi-invisible opponents called shadows, which, if destroyed, damage their leader. You can see the shadows by using the UV light to make things a lot more manageable, and if you get rid of the doll, the shadows follow suit. Finally, there are the wall corpses, which aren't really a typical enemy and are more of a hazard in the environment. They tend to be stuck to walls and spit out what I presume is blood, which hurts Murphy if he runs into it. The attacks happen once or twice in a row, so you just have to wait and make your way through once they're done projectile vomiting. As a little change, they get an upgrade in the last part of the game where they're attached to a large wheel that rolls out in front of your path. In this case, you can stand to the side or just shoot them before they attack to continue your way forward. There are a couple boss fights in Downpour 2 which are worth talking about, but in order to discuss those in depth, it's crucial to cover the story first. As Murphy makes his way through Silent Hill, he's adamantly pursued by Anne Cunningham. This is for pretty good reason, as we find out that he was involved in the slow death of her father Frank Coleridge, who previously worked as a corrections officer at Ryle State Prison. He's shown to have been very kind and caring towards Murphy, always encouraging and supporting him in the hopes he would be released. Frank was also aware of Officer Sewell and his shady operations within the prison, warning Murphy to stay away from him.
Sewell's bad news, Murph. He doesn't do anyone favors.
However, Murphy already had a deal with Sewell which had allowed him to get revenge on his son's murderer, giving the corrupt officer control over our protagonist. Eventually, Sewell called upon him to fulfill his side of the deal and carry out a favour, that being to eradicate a threat to his position, Frank Coleridge. Orchestrating a prison riot as a distraction, Sewell instructs Murphy to lead Frank to the showers where he would then be killed, although the exact details of what happens next slightly vary depending on the different endings. Regardless, the outcome of all of these is that Frank is horrifically beaten and Murphy is named the culprit, having to serve more time in jail. While Coleridge does survive, he's left unrecognisable, suffering severe brain damage and no longer being able to walk. Anne cares for her father for the next few years before he unfortunately succumbs to his condition and passes away. During those years, her marriage to her husband deteriorates, and the overwhelming desire for revenge on Murphy Pendleton takes over her life. Anne's perspective isn't covered too much in the events of Downpour, and it's actually through a series of comics called Anne's Story that we learn more about her character and background.
In the very beginning, Anne and Murphy were conceived to be a two-player experience. However, after a very short time, we realized that idea was a bit ahead of its time, and we focused on making a solid single-player horror game. But the overall story themes remained. As we were wrapping up the game for release, there were conversations about DLC and what form that might take, and Devin and I knew instantly it would be Anne's side of the story. I wrote up a general structure of it for internal discussions. Right around the time that I was leaving Konami, there were early discussions with IDW to release a companion comic to Downpour since Tom Waltz was their Silent Hill guy, and he had also written Downpour for us. I gave him a breakdown of my ideas for key moments in Anne's story. Things like Murphy and Anne operating in different chronologies, or a drowning Anne desperately reaching out for Rick's hand, only to find it's a severed hand tied to his boat. It took a few years for that deal to come together with the right artist, but thankfully, it did. It's a great companion piece to the game. There are some new details in there that weren't in my treatment, but it was no longer my story to tell. I experienced it as a fan.
The part of Anne's story that is crucial to mention is that she too was manipulated by someone in a position of power, much like how Sewell took advantage of Murphy's uncontrollable need for revenge. In her case, it was her warden, who made her perform sexual favours for him in exchange for the opportunity to kill Murphy by getting him transferred. Anne's husband soon hears about her and the warden, which is the nail in the coffin of their dying marriage. We know that Anne eventually gets her time with Murphy, though whatever plans she had in place were thrown out the window once the freak accident happens on the road. She manages to catch up with him a few times, but he almost always seems to elude her.
Story-wise, I think that Murphy's role in the story is a bit misunderstood. Many players see it as a standard tale of the town punishing our protagonist, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. Anne, I feel, is being punished because she is out for revenge right now. Murphy already got his revenge, dealt with the consequences, and did his time, as it were. Yes, he has to deal with the consequences of his actions, but those are consequences caused by Sewell, and they were already in motion outside of Silent Hill. Murphy's journey is more akin to Born from a Wish, or even Eileen's role in Silent Hill 4. While most of Walter's victims did something wrong, Eileen was marked because she was kind to him. It's basically circumstantial. The town is almost rewarding Murphy for passing a test. It gives him a key that says freedom and everything. We weren't being subtle. And if you watch during the boat scene, there are clear skies ahead of Murphy and dark storms behind Anne. And then of course, the Silent Hill ambiguity. We all know the only thing on the other side of Toluca Lake is more Silent Hill. So that's up for debate.
Murphy and Anne are going through the same cycle of events, though you could say Murphy's is already complete. Both of them were taken advantage of in their most vulnerable state by awful people in positions of power who promised them the chance for revenge. And both had their marriages fall apart after they lost their loved ones and suffered destructive grief. Now that they're together in Silent Hill, each of them has the chance to escape this ruinous cycle and the vengefulness that has wrought havoc over their lives. The idea of the two of them affecting what we see in Silent Hill is something I started to think about when analysing the enemy designs in the game. They're mostly all very humanoid in appearance, which is a noticeable departure from the typical creatures in the series, but I do feel that it has a lot of relevance to the narrative. The monsters in the lives of Anne and Murphy are real people, and the designs of what we see in the town can be associated with both of these characters' experiences. For example, Murphy is an inmate, and Anne works in a maximum security facility, so the prisoner-type enemies are no surprise, especially with the torture-related features, as Murphy feels that he is deserving of punishment, and Anne definitely shares that opinion. When it came to the dolls, I initially thought that it could perhaps be based on Murphy's ex-wife, but after reading Anne's comics, I felt that it was much more representative of the abuse she went through at the hands of the warden. Then, when it comes to the bosses in the game, the boogeyman in particular depicts the object of revenge for the two, with Murphy's boogeyman being Napier and Anne's being Murphy. Again, the appearance is very human, wearing a raincoat and gas mask as well as wielding a sledgehammer, which could illustrate the devastating damage caused by whoever is behind the mask.
Where's my boy? Is he out there? Charlie! 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 Charlie!
However, I found the scariest enemy design to be another boss called the Wheelman. It's a portrayal of Frank after the attack, bound to a wheelchair due to his severe injuries. At first, it's unsettling, but also becomes heartbreaking once you understand who it's supposed to be. And it's interesting to think about how even Murphy's boogeyman didn't look this terrifying. It could be because revenge on Napier didn't mean all that much to Murphy in the end, and the real horror that he has to face is what he did to someone who was nothing but kind to him. That guilt haunts him throughout the game, as we witness glimpses of both the wheelman and his wheelchair as our protagonist travels through Silent Hill. In one scene, as Murphy looks upon the body of the boogeyman, the face flickers between his and Napier's, maybe hinting that he's ashamed of his involvement in what happened to Frank, and that is the new monster he must face. Yes, he killed Napier, who definitely deserved it, but to be afforded that opportunity, he was involved in something much worse happening to someone who didn't deserve it, ruining not only their life, but the lives of family members left behind, once again perpetrating the cycle of revenge.
The enemy designs are kept purposefully vague. Obviously, at first, you're supposed to assume that this is Murphy's Silent Hill, and the enemies need to support that. But when you realize this is perhaps Anne's story that Murphy is caught up in, they can't betray that idea either.
On the flip side, the good conscience inside the two main characters is symbolized by their relationships with Frank, and it's his voice that speaks to Murphy to try and help him.
Murphy, run!
Also in the Anne comics, a flashback to a memory of her father is what stops her from pulling the trigger and killing Murphy at Devil's Pit.
I can't. I'm sorry.
Downpour contains additional characters who aren't connected to Murphy's history, such as Bobby Ricks, who is the local radio DJ hosting the WLMN FM station.
You're listening to the DJ Rick Show on WLMN FM, where the tracks are tight and the sweet melodies flow on and on. It's always a perfect day with DJ Ricks, your on-air friend to the end.
We can hear him playing music and relaying messages dedicated to both Murphy and others on the numerous radios we stumble across. When finally confronted, he explains that there are rules you must follow in Silent Hill, and he had sent these messages to people in the town in the hopes that they would come and help him escape by escorting him to his boat. Essentially, DJ Ricks was too afraid to overcome the trials that the town had in store for him, banking on the possibility that someone else would save him instead. However, Silent Hill has rules, and so he gets a call requesting a dedication to Ricks himself, shortly before being attacked by screamers and disappearing.
Yeah, sure. Who's it going out to? But that's nice of you to think of me. Yeah, real nice. Thank you. They're coming.
While that's the last we see of him in Downpour, he makes an appearance in Anne's story where we see him in a cage alongside Anne. Ricks admits that his lack of guts meant that he couldn't escape the town, and that takes a literal turn as he's disemboweled by monsters. Originally, his backstory as to how he ended up here was more detailed and meant for DLC. However, when that fell through, it instead featured in notes found in the Book of Memories DLC on the PlayStation Vita. In short, he got a call in from a guy who said that his girlfriend was cheating on him, and Ricks tracked down the new man and called him in, presumably instigating more drama on his show for more attention. However, this led to the original boyfriend shooting the new guy on live radio. So while DJ Ricks obviously didn't intend for that outcome, his shit-stirring did end up getting someone killed. It's also quite ironic that he sets up confrontations for others, yet is too cowardly to face his own horrors in Silent Hill. Another key figure is Howard, a mysterious postman who we see occasionally guiding Murphy and is completely unfazed by anything happening in the town. He's shown in the Past Life comic, which is set in the 1800s, meaning that it's possible that Howard is an entity created by Silent Hill, or is someone who is stuck there for eternity and acts on behalf of the will of the town.
From St. Maria's, the old orphanage up there on the hill.
No. This can't be right.
Got your name on it, doesn't it? Seems plenty right to me. Of course, you won't know till you open it, will you?
No. Enough of this shit. No. I'm done. I'm finished with the riddles, the mind games. Whatever I did to get here, I've had enough. I want out. Do you understand me? Do you?
Son, you still don't get it. It doesn't matter what you want. As for me, I got mail to deliver. Goodbye, Murphy.
He can also be found in Book of Memories, fulfilling a delivery in the introduction, as well as taking on the role of a shopkeeper in the dungeons. And say what you will about Howard, but I have nothing but respect for the grind.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard that.
Yeah? Then what?
Well, let's just say I could finally put this damn bag down for starters.
Hope Silent Hill gives you a pay rise, buddy. One more side character I'd like to touch upon is JP Sater, who I mentioned earlier as the guy who caused an accident that killed several children because he was drunk driving a tourist train.
If you head through the cavern, there's a train. It can take you to Hillside. Boy, I tell you, all the kids, they just love that little train.
He was actually intended to act as a boss encounter for the player, appearing as a giant stretched out face with what looks like a monocle.
Originally, there was a boss encounter with JP Sater, which took the form of this hideous train man creature. The goal was to have characters such as Howard and Sater, who have both accepted their places in Silent Hill, but with drastically different results. This would be something for players to ponder and explore. For various reasons, we needed to cut this encounter, and it isn't exactly key to the story, but we didn't want to waste the creepy model. So we extended the mine train sequence so it could end with the reveal and taunting by Sater. I guess Murphy can be thankful that he wasn't part of Sater's story, so he didn't have to overcome an enormous steam engine behemoth.
In regards to bosses, there is one more opponent Murphy must face after he defeats the Wheelman, the method of which involves taking this heartbreaking representation of Frank Coleridge off of life support, all while his heavy breathing and heart monitor tick relentlessly before eventually flatlining as you pull the final plug. Anne discovers our protagonist over the dead body of her father, and finally reveals to Murphy that she is Frank's daughter, blaming him for all that had happened before taking a shot.
My father was a good man. He didn't believe in revenge. But I do.
This cuts to Murphy taking on the appearance of the Boogeyman, who we control in the final fight against Anne. The whole game is a trial with the judgment provided at the end. As the player, our actions ultimately decide what outcome Murphy receives, which relies on the morality score that has been accrued up until this point, on top of the final choice when facing Anne. Upon dealing enough damage to her, you're presented with one last decision to make. Either spare Anne's life, or kill her. If you've gotten positive morality points overall and also choose to spare her, you'll receive the forgiveness ending. This proceeds to show us a flashback in which Murphy refused to hurt Frank. However, this prompts Sewell to hit him and expose that he didn't even land the killing blow on Napier, and it was instead Sewell who had to finish him off. He continues to hit Frank, then calls in the crime and frames Murphy.
Roger that. Should've just kept your end of the deal, Murph. Cop killers don't last too long in here.
I'm sorry, Frank.
We then see Murphy apologize to Anne, who realizes he wasn't to blame and forgives him. They hug it out and we see them transported back into the real world, having managed to escape the nightmare of Silent Hill. Anne gets a call from a colleague who asks if she's found Murphy, but she lies so that he can escape and live freely.
Roger. We'll send the bird sweep the shore again. We've located everyone except for one, Pendleton Murphy. You got a 20 on Pendleton, over?
Negative. Pendleton's dead. Over.
Roger that.
On the other hand, if you spare Anne with negative morality, this leads to the ending called Truth and Justice. This is mostly the same as the forgiveness ending, and Anne lets Murphy go, even thanking him as he leaves.
Murphy, wait. Thank you.
But we get an extra scene as she returns to the prison to have a little chat with Officer Sewell.
Hey, what are you doing back here so soon, sweetheart? Can't get enough of the place. The hell's this?
You used to work with my father, Frank Coleridge.
Yeah? So?
We need to talk.
This ending is also what's shown in the Anne story comics, and is one I think is going to be the most satisfying for most people, since the actual murderer of her father is for once facing some consequences. Killing Anne with positive morality brings about the ending called Full Circle. Here, Murphy does kill Frank as instructed by Sewell, and when he realises and sees both Frank and Anne lying dead in front of him, he attempts to also shoot himself. This just brings him back to a prison cell, with the wheelman gazing at him through the bars. Murphy is forever trapped with the guilt of what he has done, cursed to repeat this again and again and again.
Stop!
If you instead kill Anne with a negative morality score, this will prompt the execution ending. This is arguably the darkest out of all of them, as it's revealed that it was Murphy who drowned his son Charlie, all in retaliation for his ex-wife divorcing him and seeking sole custody of their child. It's also stated that Murphy murdered Frank as well, and considering he is evil enough to have killed Charlie, I don't think Saul even had to be involved in orchestrating that, but it seems that he did.
I'll see you in hell. Cupcake.
Even so, Murphy's additional count of manslaughter brought his execution day forward, and we see him administered a lethal injection. Depending on the ending, Murphy's level of involvement in Frank's and even Napier's murder changes. Both the past and future are affected. Those aren't the only endings though, as if you take too much damage during the final showdown against Anne, you trigger a special ending called Reversal.
Did I wake you, Cunningham? Come on. Rise and shine, you know the drill.
What? Where am I? What's going on?
Guess today's the big day, huh? Tell you the truth, I'm sort of sorry to see you go.
Anne switches places with Murphy, and Murphy with Officer Sewell, mirroring the cutscene we saw near the start of the game.
Tell you the truth, I'm sort of sorry to see you go.
I absolutely love this scene, and there's a few different ways you could interpret it in addition to whether or not it's real. But the thing that stuck with me most is that this could even imply that there's someone who has now taken Anne's place in this cycle. Of course, we don't find out if that's the case or what exactly is happening here, but its ambiguity makes for the most shocking ending in Downpour while still being true to the themes it explores. Like Silent Hill 4, Downpour is sadly missing a signature UFO ending, but it does instead reward the player with a silly scene of its own once a side quest called Digging Up the Past is completed. This is only available on a second playthrough of the game, and involves using a shovel to dig up 7 trinkets that are flagged by a nearby barrel with a lit candle on top. The treasures you find are all references to past Silent Hill titles, including a radio, a Robbie the Rabbit plushie, and an alien toy. Once you pick up the final collectible, you'll be locked into Ending E regardless of your morality choices. So after you defeat Anne, this happens.
Such a shame. Here be monsters again. Here be monsters again. Surprise!
Oh, you guys.
After tirelessly digging a tunnel out of his cell, Murphy emerges from his hole to find a surprise birthday party just for him. It's such a monumental occasion that even characters from Silent Hill 2 and 3 decided to make an appearance. Honestly, it's the perfect way to do a Pyramid Head appearance outside Silent Hill 2. And even Murphy can't help but smile watching the cake and table get sliced in half. Speaking of the surprise ending, the items you dug up can be viewed in the extras menu, and there are also 3 other artifacts pertaining to Downpour's story that can be found lying around in certain locations even on a first playthrough. One of these is a toy van modelled after Napier's vehicle, though when displayed in the extras menu it looks a lot more like a different car that appears in the series. Those aren't the only secrets you can spot either, and I barely touched upon them all in this video. But my personal favourite has got to be the recreation of Room 302 from Silent Hill 4, which you can gain access to by using a ladder hook. There were also DLC codes that were given out as pre-order bonuses for Downpour, which would provide buyers with a passcode to open lockers that would provide them with certain weapons. The code would be different depending on where they pre-ordered from, like Amazon or GameStop, but the thing is, the codes were universal. This of course meant that they were shared online and anyone could use them. And though it defeats the purpose of exclusivity, it does avoid DLC like this eventually becoming inaccessible as codes run out. And I sure don't mind being able to use them 12 years after the game's original release. Another funny feature that Downpour had was that it could be played in 3D if you had a TV that supported it. So you could put on a pair of 3D glasses and play through the game that way. Unfortunately, this wasn't something I could test myself without a suitable TV, though I was surprised to find that there were actually quite a few PS3 titles that were playable in 3D mode. And on the topic of the PS3 era, PlayStation Home also had a few Downpour-themed items, including Murphy and Anne's outfits, as well as a personal space based on the Devil's Pit Stop diner. So whether you want to sit politely at a table or break it down felon style, anything is possible in this virtual realm. The first thing I knew and loved about Downpour before even playing it was that it has a theme song by Jonathan Davis from Korn. It took me years of listening to it before I realised the song was actually for the game, and had previously just thought it was from one of the Silent Hill movies. Anyway, I was very happy to wait and let that song play every time I both booted up the game and hit the credits. After finishing Murphy's story, I understood that the lyrics were very relevant too, and I feel like the track perfectly matches the aesthetic of this title in particular.
When we got the unfortunate news we could not involve Akira Yamaoka, we knew that finding a worthy replacement for the game's score was job number 1. And we were fortunate enough to be connected with Daniel Leaked, who did an amazing job matching the mood of Silent Hill with his own style. But another big aspect of the Silent Hill music is the attract mode video along with a rock song. Of course, Yamaoka-san had always handled this as well, along with Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. Since this was kind of up in the air, our licensing department wanted to find a good licensing partner that might extend the awareness of Silent Hill beyond its core audience, but still sounded brand appropriate. A lot of different artists were discussed, but in the end, Korn made the most sense due to a variety of factors I can't really get into. However, one key factor was tailoring the lyrics to Silent Hill Downpour, rather than just being given an unreleased B-side as is.
Silent Hill Downpour really surprised me with how much there is to it. I've barely covered all there is to talk about. Especially when it comes to the side quests and story, there is an overwhelming amount of stuff you can get into. I've really enjoyed looking into the information both in-game and outside of it, learning more about its development and even some of the obstacles that came with it.
One of the challenges of development was just knowing the feelings and expectations of the fanbase at the time. The other Western Silent Hills had their fans of course, but nothing had made a huge splash like Silent Hill 2, which itself wasn't popular immediately, but that's a different story entirely. We were very proud of Shattered Memories, but that was an unconventional entry, and we just really wanted Downpour to be the HD Silent Hill that fans deserved. We all put a lot of pressure on ourselves. However, even taking a quick peek at any forum, there was so much cynicism that it made work challenging. And then at some point during the final year or so of development, an infamous series of videos released, and it sucked up a lot of air in the room, as it were. It also ended a lot of the spirited debate that Silent Hill fans enjoyed, as there were a lot of declarations of the true canon, or here's what the game is really about. Those debates were always what kept the fanbase alive and vibrant, and it was rough seeing that go away. I don't really feel like Downpour was given its fair shake in the in-depth analysis department, which I was really looking forward to seeing during development.
If you're interested in seeing more in-depth discussions on Downpour, the Gaming Muse has put in a lot of work analysing various parts of the game on their channel. The Western Silent Hill games tend to fall into a kind of discourse prison where they're only judged against the original 4 titles, so it's nice to see more coverage on the elements of the game that go unnoticed as a result. As far as open world horror goes, I'm glad my experience with Downpour can be added to the list of those I greatly enjoyed. A big thank you to Tomm Hewlett for the interview, which you can read in full via the link in the description. And of course thanks to Sputnik34 for providing their voice for the quotes. They have a channel of their own which I recommend checking out, so please do show them support. A huge thanks to my patrons, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to subscribe if you want to stay notified for my future work.